Welcome back, my dear crime lovers. This is a new episode of the history of the American Mafia, written and adapted to podcast by Fabio Fabiano and translated and read by me, Grace Carlisi. This is part 2 of The Good Killers. The second part of the series dedicated to the Good Killers, I would like to begin by talking about the victim, Camillo Caiozzo. He was born to Giuseppe and Maria Pepitone in Castellammare del Golfo, a beautiful sea town in Sicily, on November the 29th, 1894. His was a peasant family. Caiozzo was held responsible for the death of a Magadino relative in Castellammare. This alleged crime appears to have been the unsolved 1916 murder of Stefano Magadino's brother, Pietro. On June the 28th, 1920, Caiozzo landed in New York aboard the steamer Savoia. The Good Killers, upon his arrival in the States, were tasked with carrying out revenge. Caiozzo initially settled with his mother Maria and siblings on East 12th Street in Manhattan. Knowing the danger he was running, he kept away from Francesco Puma, a member of the Good Killers gang, who lived in the same neighborhood. After a year, the Good Killers decided they could easily approach Caiozzo by using his childhood friend Fontana to take him by surprise. Fontana claimed to have learned of the murder plot when the three of the gang leaders pushed him into an alleyway, pointed guns to his stomach, and ordered him to swear to commit the crime by threatening to cut him into pieces. Fontana, who had heard of the Good Killers' criminal exploits in Detroit, felt threatened. He gave in to the threats and promised to kill Caiozzo. The two old Sicilian friends met in the New World in the summer of 1921 and probably went to live together for a short time. At the end of July, Fontana offered his childhood friend a business trip and then a vacation in New Jersey. Caiozzo had recently sold a business for $700. Fontana urged him to invest the proceeds in a brothel. He offered to connect his old friend with a New Jersey acquaintance who ran a casino near Shark River in Monmouth County. Fontana also proposed to his friend to spend a few days on vacation and go duck hunting. The two arrived on Thursday, July the 26th in Neptune City. The day of departure was the last time that Maria Caiozzo would see her son alive. Fontana told Ceravo, the owner of the inn, the undercover for the brothel, how the good assassins had asked him to kill Caiozzo. The owner of the club knew about the gang and realized that Fontana had no choice but to kill his friend. The innkeeper offered Fontana the use of a hunting rifle and recommended that the murder be carried out in the woods far from the inn. Caiozzo and Fontana went duck hunting the following day. The two men ventured into a wild and swampy area along Shark River. Fontana, armed with Ceravo's rifle, during the hunt positioned himself behind Caiozzo. When the men were not far from the inn, Fontana pointed the barrel of the gun against his old friend's back and pulled the trigger. The lead buckshot ripped through Caiozzo's back and side. Panic-stricken and guilty, Fontana hastily returned to the inn, leaving Caiozzo to die. At about 2:30 p.m., Ceravo, seeing him, asked him if everything had gone well. Fontana answered, yes. Ceravo wanted to know where the murder had taken place, and Fontana pointed out, right over there, pointing to a spot not so far away. Ceravo got very angry and scolded Fontana. I told you to do it further away. Now you have put my business to risk. Leaving murder victims lying around near a place of business wasn't exactly what you'd call an attraction for clients. Certainly not good for business. Ceravo grabbed a shovel and led by Fontana to where the body of Caiozzo was. When they reached the site, Ceravo tried to get Fontana to bury the body, but he refused. Disgusted, Ceravo dragged the body for a dozen paces and hid it in a bush. The two men discussed the matter with Giuseppe Lombardi, a member of the Good Killers gang. Lombardi immediately left for New York. The next morning, before dawn, he returned to Nettuno City, accompanied by Francesco Puma. With the help of Fontana and Ceravo, they identified the remains of Caiozzo, tied the stones to the body and sank it in the waters of Shark River. After that, they fixed up a meeting date and returned by train to New York. When he reached the city, Fontana was very worried. As he reported, Lombardi and Puma invited him to visit Brooklyn with them. Fontana was afraid of being killed, thrown alive in an oven in the Bonventre bakery, and understandably declined the invitation. 3 days later, a hearing was held before the Monmouth judge. Ceravo Davi's attorney argued that his client knew nothing of the murder and therefore should be released. The county prosecutor highlighted the connections between Ceravo and the submerged remains found attached to Caiozzo's corpse. The judge set bail for Ceravo at $10,000. On the same day in New York, Fontana confessed the crime to Fiaschetti and was arrested on Broadway. The Italian squad quickly devised a plan to trap Stefano Magaddino. Fontana phoned the leader of the Good Killers and told him that he was sure the police were on him, and asked Magaddino to bring some money to Central Station so he could escape. Magaddino took and brought $30 to Fontana at New York's Grand Central Station, where there were dozens of plainclothes policemen. Detective Silvio Repetto, disguised as a traveller, stood nearby as Magaddino handed the money to Fontana and told the barber to take a train to Buffalo, where he would be safe under the protection of the local mafia boss. Investigators immediately surrounded Magaddino. The latter, despite having resisted the arrest, was overwhelmed. The Italian team at that point arrested the leaders of the Good Killers, Bonventre, Lombardi, Galante, Puma e Di Gregorio. Led to the police station, the arrested were placed in the same room. Magaddino, taking advantage of that situation, attacked Fontana, shouting, "I'll burn you for this. You won't get away with it." Fiaschetti tried to block Magaddino, who kicked him in the stomach. Carlton Simon, Deputy Commissioner of Police Narcotics Section, rushed to Fiaschetti's aid and had a fight with the prisoner. Fiaschetti picked up the situation in hand using a truncheon. Magaddino was hit firmly in the head and lost consciousness. Blood came out of a head wound and he needed stitches to close the wound on his forehead. All 7 men were locked up in the prison, called the Tomb. Monmouth County Police, after hearing about Fontana's confession and charges against the Good Killers, indicted Fontana, Magaddino, Bonventre, Puma, Lombardi and Galante. The judge of that county therefore issued a warrant for the arrest of the aforementioned men. On August the 17th, a preliminary hearing was held in the New York City courthouse. The court ruled that 6 men sought by the Monmouth Prosecutor Office would be held in cells without bail. Fontana was transported to Raymond Street Prison in Brooklyn so he could not be intimidated by the others. The remaining 6 returned to the prison called the Tombs. While in Raymond Street Jail, Bartolo Fontana made statements to visiting Investigative Lieutenant Bert McPherson, head of the Italian Detroit squad, and with Nicholas Selvaggi, First Assistant District Attorney for Kings County, Brooklyn, New York. Fontana confessed that he had started a number of arson fires in Detroit and disclosed information on 16 Good Killers murder cases. It was ascertained that the Good assassins had killed the 3 Buccellato brothers, 2 Giannone brothers, father and son Pietro and Giuseppe Bosco, Luca Sarcona and Andrea Lacato. Much of the history attributed to Fontana's confession was full of contradictions and hardly credible. Today, after the discovery of the Good Killers, much of what Fontana claimed contradicts the commonly accepted Detroit underworld story. For weeks, newspapers across the country reacted hysterically to any news of murders linked to Italians. all the murders were attributed or connected in some way to the Good Killers. From subsequent investigations, it appears more likely that the organisation known as the Good Killers was actually simply a single group or branch of the Castellamarese Mafia crime that later evolved into mafia families in Brooklyn, Buffalo, Detroit. By mid-September, the major newspapers had lost interest. New York authorities detained the 6 men: Fontana, Magaddino, Bonventre, Galante, Lombardi and Puma, on behalf of the state of New Jersey, pending extradition orders. When the extradition documents were officially filed, they concerned only Fontana, Lombardi and Puma. Although the Monmouth County Police were interested in all 6 men, the county court made the decision to drop a larger conspiracy case against the Good Killers and focus on those who had been physically present in New Jersey for the murder of Camillo Cabiozzo and the day after the body was concealed. Therefore, Magaddino, Bonventre and Galante were freed. Lombardi was the first of the 3 to be brought back to New Jersey. Fontana and Puma were transferred shortly after. Puma and Lombardi, pleading not guilty to the charges of concealment and murder, were both released on bail. Fontana, despite having confessed to the premeditated murder of Cabiozzo, pleaded not guilty to the accusation of first-degree murder against him, possibly hoping that the prosecutors would allow him to plead guilty to manslaughter in exchange for his testimony against the other defendant. On March the 22nd, 1922, Fontana was sentenced to life imprisonment and forced labor. Later that same day, Fontana was taken back to court to testify against the host, Salvatore Ceravo. Fontana told the court about his conversations with Ceravo the day before Cabiozzo's murder. He told them about Ceravo's offer to lend him the rifle and his instructions to carry out the murder away from the inn. He also testified about the host's role in the temporary hiding place and the subsequent concealment of Cabiozzo's remains, and about the stones and ropes that were taken from the inn's property to keep the body immersed in the river. Since Fontana was convicted of the murder, his statements against the host were not considered valid. Ceravo's defense attorney pointed out before the court that his client had nothing to do with the murder, and that his client never spoke to Fontana about the murder, and he didn't know him apart from the short vacation he and Cabiozzo had spent at the inn, managed by him. The innkeeper declared that he did not know Giuseppe Lombardi. In fact, he said, "I first heard about the murder from a taxi driver on Springwood Avenue who told me a dead man had been found near my home." It was clear, according to the attorney Davis, that the story of the Good Killers was invented by Fontana in an attempt to divert the blame for Cabiozzo's murder onto others. Fontana, Davis, claimed, killed his old friend, only to rob him of his money. The Ceravo jury deliberated after 4 hours, and on March the 24th issued a verdict of not guilty. The prosecution, realizing that his main witness was not credible, promptly dropped the other charges against Ceravo. The innkeeper was released, just as Fontana began his life behind bars. The proceedings against Puma and Lombardi, initially scheduled for the end of January 1922, were repeatedly postponed. In fact, it wouldn't have been dealt with in a courtroom. On November the 4th, 1922, Puma took an evening stroll near his home at 508 East 12th Street, Manhattan. With his hands in his pockets and a cigar in his mouth, he turned the corner. 5 gunshots were fired at him from a short distance. Several bullets went through his chest, abdomen, and right wrist. A stray shot injured a 12-year-old girl playing nearby. Puma drew his gun and turned to face his attacker. At that moment, the killer thrust a knife blade into his stomach. He fell, bleeding badly, and passed out, the cigar burning on the sidewalk beside him. He died of his injuries at Bellevue Hospital. With the news of his death, the New York Times revealed the suspicion that Puma had collaborated with the authorities in an investigation into the Sicilian American underworld. A previous attempt on his life was made a month earlier. Puma kept the incident a secret from everyone but his family. A month after Puma's death, Monmouth County attorney no longer prosecuted Lombardi and dropped the charges. The Good Killers gang was soon forgotten by the Americans and the press. Smuggler conflicts in major cities and mafia killings resulting from the so-called Castellamarese War at the beginning of the following decade captured the headlines. Of all the murderers accused in the Good Killers, only Fontana, the whistleblower, ended up serving a considerable prison sentence. He was locked up, registered with his full name, Bartolomeo Fontana, in the New Jersey State Prison in Trenton, starting March the 25th, 1922. It is widely believed that he died there. However, records of the detainees show that he was temporarily paroled on December the 15th, 1939, after nearly 20 years of prison. He was definitely released on January the 21st, 1941. In 1942, Bartolomeo Fontana resided at 860 Sutter Avenue in Brooklyn. Fontana's death was not recorded in public records.